The atmosphere at Nexus Prime was vibrant with the usual buzz of interstellar commerce and diplomacy. Jack stepped off the shuttle, adjusting to the artificial gravity that was slightly lighter than Earth's. He was met by his colleague Marco, a fellow human diplomat known for his quick wit and reliable friendship. "Welcome to Nexus, Jack." Marco greeted him with a broad grin. "You're going to find this place either absolutely exhilarating or completely overwhelming." Jack chuckled, shaking his friend's hand. "With you as my guide, I'm prepared for a bit of both." As they walked through the bustling spaceport, Jack's eyes were drawn to the diverse array of beings. Traders from distant galaxies bartered loudly, their voices mingling into an intoxicating symphony of alien dialects. Jack's role as a diplomat had brought him to many crossroads of cultures, but Nexus Prime was a hub like no other. "So, what's on the agenda?" Jack inquired, his diplomat instincts kicking in. "First, there's a briefing with the station's head of diplomatic relations. Then, you're off to meet the Elysaran envoy." "Heard she's quite the character," Marco replied, navigating through the crowd. "The Elysaran envoy, huh?" Jack mused. "What do we know about her?" "Not much, just that her name is Lyra, and she's here to discuss potential tech exchanges," Marco explained, leading Jack into a sleek, hovering transport that would take them to the heart of the diplomatic sector. The transport whizzed through towering structures of gleaming metal and pulsating lights. Jack observed the scenery, his mind partly on the tasks ahead and partly on the mysterious Elysaran envoy. Upon arriving at the diplomatic quarters, they were ushered into a spacious conference room. The air was cool, a welcome relief from the bustling warmth of the port. They were soon joined by Lyra, who entered with an air of quiet confidence that seemed to silence the room. Lyra was unlike any Elysaran Jack had seen before. Her skin shimmered subtly, reflecting the room's ambient light, and her eyes were a deep violet that seemed almost liquid. "Mr. Jack Dawson, I presume." Lyra's voice was calm and melodious. "I am Lyra, envoy from Elysaria. It is a pleasure to meet you." Jack extended his hand, which Lyra took gently. "The pleasure is mine, envoy Lyra. I've been looking forward to our discussions." Lyra smiled slightly, her gaze assessing. "I have heard much about your diplomatic efforts. Elysaria is keen on fostering a relationship that could benefit from Earth's unique perspectives." Jack nodded, feeling the weight of his responsibilities. "I share the same hopes. Shall we begin?" Marco watched as Jack and Lyra settled into a deep conversation about their respective technologies. Their dialogue was dense with technical terms and possibilities of what a partnership could achieve. As the meeting progressed, Jack found himself increasingly impressed by Lyra's insight and the subtle grace with which she navigated the conversation. There was an elegance about her that went beyond her appearance, a sharpness of mind that captivated him. When the meeting concluded, Marco leaned over to Jack. "Well, what do you think?" Jack responded without looking away from where Lyra was conversing with her aides. "I think this mission just got a lot more interesting." As they left the conference room, Jack's mind was alive with possibilities, not just the diplomatic alliances but the personal connection he felt with Lyra. It was a spark, unexpected and intriguing, setting the stage for a journey that was bound to be anything but ordinary. Chapter 2: Forbidden Interest. The days following the initial meeting with Lyra were a blur of official functions and informal gatherings, as Jack and Marco navigated the complex web of diplomacy on Nexus Prime. Despite the whirlwind of activity, Jack's thoughts often drifted back to Lyra, her insightful comments during their discussions, and her understated smile. One evening, as the artificial sunset painted the sky of Nexus Prime in hues of purple and gold, Marco nudged Jack as they enjoyed a drink at the spaceport's observation deck. "You seem a bit distracted, my friend. All thoughts on our Elysaran envoy." Jack smirked, taking a sip of his drink before responding. "Is it that obvious?" "Only to someone who knows you as well as I do," Marco replied, his tone light but observant. "She's quite remarkable, isn't she?" "She is," Jack conceded, his gaze fixed on the bustling port below. "I've never met anyone quite like her. There's a connection there. I can't quite explain it." "Be careful, Jack," Marco warned, his voice dropping to a serious tone. "Interspecies fraternization isn't just frowned upon. It could jeopardize your career and the delicate balance of our negotiations." "I know," Jack murmured, the weight of his responsibilities settling back on his shoulders. "But there's something about her that I can't ignore." The next day, at a cultural exchange seminar, Jack found himself seated next to Lyra. They shared discreet glances, a silent acknowledgement of their previous conversation. As the seminar broke for lunch, Lyra leaned over to whisper to Jack. Would you care to join me for a walk? The gardens on this station are quite serene, she suggested, her violet eyes glinting with an unspoken invitation. Jack hesitated for a moment, aware of Marco's earlier caution, then nodded. I'd like that. They strolled through the lush greenery of the station's botanical garden, an oasis of peace amid the chaos of diplomatic engagements. The conversation flowed effortlessly between them, touching on topics from their childhoods to their hopes for their respective worlds. I've always believed that understanding begins on a personal level, Lyra said, pausing to admire a flowering vine. It's rare to find someone from another species who understands that. Jack smiled, feeling a sense of kinship. I feel the same. It's refreshing to meet someone who shares that perspective. Their walk extended well beyond the allocated lunch hour, neither of them willing to end the conversation. As they neared the entrance of the garden, Lyra stopped, turning to face Jack. I should return before we are missed, she said, a hint of reluctance in her voice. Thank you, Jack. Today has been enlightening. Likewise, Lyra, Jack replied, feeling a pang of disappointment as they parted ways. Back at their quarters, Jack recounted the day to Marco, who listened intently. She's different, Marco. It's not just about diplomacy with her, it's something deeper. Marco sighed, sitting back in his chair. Just remember the stakes, Jack. Sometimes, the heart must follow the head, especially in our line of work. Jack nodded, knowing his friend was right. But as he lay in bed that night, staring up at the simulated starlight, his thoughts were with Lyra. The connection he felt with her was undeniable, and despite the risks, he knew this was only the beginning of something that could defy expectations. Chapter 3: The Gala Incident. A week had passed since Jack and Lyra's walk in the gardens, and the memory lingered in Jack's mind like a persistent melody. The Nexus Prime Diplomatic Corps was abuzz with preparations for the upcoming gala, an event designed to foster unity among the various intergalactic representatives. Jack was adjusting his tie in his quarters when Marco knocked and entered, dressed sharply in his formal attire. Ready to face the music? Marco asked with a grin, adjusting his cufflinks. As I'll ever be, Jack replied, managing a smile. It's just another gala, right? Just another gala filled with potential allies and adversaries, Marco quipped as they left their quarters. And, of course, a certain Elisarian envoy. The grand hall of the station was transformed into a spectacle of light and color. Aliens of various species mingled, their languages creating a cacophony of exotic sounds. Jack scanned the crowd, his eyes searching for Lyra. He found her standing near a viewport, her attire a shimmering blend of Elisarian tradition and universal elegance. Jack approached, his heart accelerating slightly. Good evening, Lyra, he greeted, offering a polite nod. Lyra turned, her face lighting up with a smile. Jack, it's lovely to see you here. You look distinguished. Thank you, Lyra. You look stunning yourself, Jack replied, a compliment sincere. They shared a moment of silence, the noise around them fading into the background. As the evening progressed, Jack and Lyra found themselves together again, this time on the dance floor. The music was a slow, haunting melody that seemed to resonate with the tension between them. Dancing was not part of the plan tonight, Jack murmured as he carefully placed his hand on her waist, mindful of the eyes watching them. Perhaps not, but it seems right, doesn't it? Lyra responded, her hand resting lightly on his shoulder as they moved to the music. Their conversation was sparse, the connection between them speaking louder than words could. As the song neared its end, Jack found himself drawn in by Lyra's gaze. Without thinking, he leaned down and their lips met in a kiss that was both a mistake and a revelation. The kiss broke as quickly as it had begun, both pulling back with a start. The realization of what had just happened and its implications dawned on them. Oh, we shouldn't have done that, Jack stammered, his face a mask of concern. Lyra nodded, her expression unreadable. It was a momentary lapse. It won't happen again. They parted ways, the joy of the evening overshadowed by the gravity of their actions. Jack returned to Marco, who had observed the exchange from a distance. Jack, that was... No, Jack cut in, his voice low. It was a mistake. Marco placed a hand on his shoulder. It might complicate things, but it's done. Now let's figure out how to handle this. The rest of the gala passed in a blur for Jack. He engaged in necessary conversations and laughed at the right jokes, but his mind was elsewhere, replaying the brief forbidden kiss. As the night drew to a close, Jack and Marco returned to their quarters. The weight of the evening's event hung heavily between them. That kiss, Jack, it could undo a lot of the work you've put in, Marco said seriously. I know, Marco. And I can't promise it won't happen again, Jack confessed, troubled by his own admission. There's something about her that I can't stay away from. Marco sighed, understanding yet concerned. Just be careful, my friend. In diplomacy as in life, some lines are dangerous to cross. Jack nodded, the complexity of his feelings for Lyra leaving him restless. As he lay in bed, he realized that despite the potential consequences, his heart was not entirely his to command. The connection with Lyra was undeniable, and he was unsure if he could, or even wanted to resist it. Chapter 4: Heartbeats and Harmony. In the days following the gala, the station buzzed with rumors and whispers about the unexpected moment between Jack and Lyra. Despite the talk, Jack found himself unable to steer clear of Lyra, their clandestine meetings becoming the highlights of his days. One evening, Marco and Jack sat in a lounge area of their quarters, discussing the situation in hushed tones. You need to be cautious, Jack, Marco advised, his expression tense. You're playing with fire, and in our line of work, the flames can get pretty high. Jack nodded, his gaze distant. I know, Marco, but when I'm with her, it feels like the rest of the universe fades away. It's as if our hearts beat in harmony. Marco sighed, recognizing the depth of his friend's feelings. Just make sure those heartbeats don't end up causing an interstellar incident, okay? Later that night, Jack met Lyra in one of the quieter sections of the botanical gardens, away for prying eyes. The night was warm, and the air was filled with the sweet scent of blooming flowers native to various planets. As Lyra approached, Jack felt his heart accelerate, the anticipation of her presence overwhelming his usual composure. Lyra, he greeted softly as she reached him. Jack, she replied, her voice just as gentle. They stood for a moment, simply looking at each other, the tension and attraction palpable. I've been thinking about what happened at the gala, Jack began, his voice low. About us? Lyra nodded, her eyes reflecting the starlight. So have I. It's dangerous, what we're doing. But I can't seem to stay away. Jack reached out, taking her hand. His touch was tentative, yet filled with emotion. Neither can I. It's like he paused, searching for the words. When a human's heart beats for an alien's love, there's nothing quite like it. Lyra's smile was sad but sincere. That's beautifully put. And it's true. The heart doesn't care about politics or species. It just feels. They walked through the garden, their hands still clasped, sharing thoughts about their worlds, their dreams, and the challenges they faced. The night deepened around them, creating a secluded bubble in which their forbidden relationship could momentarily thrive. I wish things were simpler, Jack confessed as they sat on a secluded bench, surrounded by luminous plants. So do I, Lyra agreed, leaning her head against his shoulder. But perhaps our meeting can serve as a bridge between our peoples, even if they never know the truth about us. Their conversation meandered to lighter topics, laughter mingling with the rustle of leaves. For those few hours, they allowed themselves to forget the complications of their stations and the potential repercussions of their bond. As the night came to an end, they stood up, reluctance in their movements. Jack held Lyra's face gently in his hands, and they shared a kiss, soft and slow, a contrast to the stolen one at the gala. We should be careful, Lyra murmured against his lips. We will, Jack promised, though in his heart he wondered how they could possibly navigate the path they were on without coming to harm. They parted ways, each carrying the weight of their shared moments back into their separate lives. Jack returned to his quarters, where Marco was waiting. You look like you've made a decision, Marco observed, studying his friend's thoughtful expression. I have, Jack replied. I want to see where this goes with Lyra, despite the risks. I have to. Marco nodded, understanding and concern etched on his face. Just remember that I'm here, no matter how this turns out. Jack felt grateful for Marco's unwavering support. As he lay in bed later that night, he thought about Lyra, about the complexity of emotions she stirred in him, and about the uncertain future they were stepping into together. It was uncharted territory, but for the first time, Jack felt that the journey might just be worth it. Chapter 5: Echoes of Doubt. In the weeks that followed, Jack and Lyra's secret rendezvous became a regular occurrence, each meeting deepening the connection that neither could deny nor fully embrace due to the weight of their responsibilities. Meanwhile, whispers of their liaisons began to stir among their peers, leading to murmurs of disapproval and concern. One afternoon, Jack found himself in the company of Marco and another fellow diplomat, Thomas, in the recreational lounge of the diplomatic quarters. The trio sat at a corner table, ostensibly discussing upcoming negotiations, but Thomas soon steered the conversation toward the rumors. So Jack Thomas began, fixing him with a pointed look. There are rumors flying around about you and the Elisarian envoy. Care to enlighten us? Jack stiffened, exchanging a quick glance with Marco, who gave a subtle shake of his head. There's nothing to enlighten, Jack replied, keeping his voice steady. Lyra and I are just colleagues working on several projects together. Thomas raised an eyebrow, his skepticism clear. Just make sure you're not risking your career or our diplomatic efforts for a fleeting connection. Jack's jaw clenched at the word fleeting, but he maintained his composure. I appreciate your concern, Thomas, but there's no need to worry. As the day drew to a close, Jack met Lyra in their usual secluded spot in the gardens. The air was tense as they greeted each other, the pressure of the circulating rumors casting a shadow over their meeting. Jack, we need to talk, Lyra said without preamble, her usual warmth tempered by seriousness. I've heard the rumors. They're getting louder, and I'm concerned about the impact they could have on both of us. Jack nodded, feeling the weight of her words. I know. It's not just us anymore. It's our positions, our people. I've been thinking a lot about this. They walked in silence for a few moments, each lost in thought. Finally, Jack stopped and faced her. What do we do, Lyra? This isn't just about how we feel anymore. It's about the potential consequences of those feelings. Lyra looked up at him, her eyes troubled. I don't know, Jack. Part of me wants to ignore the rules to see where this could go. But another part of me is scared of the damage we might cause. Jack took her hands in his, feeling the familiar jolt of connection. Maybe we need to consider taking a step back. It might help quiet the rumors and protect our missions. Lyra's expression softened, a mix of relief and sadness. Perhaps you're right. Maybe some distance will help us figure out how to handle this. We can't afford to be reckless. The decision hung heavily between them, the realization that stepping back was the right choice, doing little to ease the sense of loss. They agreed to keep their interactions professional and limit their meetings to only those that were necessary for their work. As they parted ways that evening, the echo of their intertwined heartbeats seemed to linger in the air, a reminder of what they were trying to preserve and what they might ultimately lose. Jack returned to his quarters, where Marco was waiting. Everything all right? Marco asked, noting Jack's somber mood. We're going to take a step back, Jack explained, sinking into a chair. It's for the best, given the circumstances. Marco nodded, his face showing understanding and empathy. You're making a tough choice, but probably the wise one. Just know that I'm here for whatever you need. As Jack lay in bed later that night, the echoes of doubt reverberated through his mind. Had he made the right decision? Could there truly be a future for him and Lyra? Or was this the beginning of the end? The questions haunted him, sleep remaining just out of reach as he grappled with the implications of his heart's most profound conflict. Chapter 6: The Ultimatum. Days turned into weeks, and the atmosphere around Jack and Lyra grew increasingly strained. Their professional interactions were impeccably polite, yet beneath the surface, the storm of unspoken emotions brewed. Despite their mutual decision to distance themselves, the rumors did not subside, instead gaining a momentum of their own. During a routine strategy meeting, Jack was pulled aside by his superior, Director Simmons, a stern man who had little patience for distractions from diplomatic missions. Jack, a moment in my office, please, Simmons said, his tone brooking no argument. Jack followed Simmons into the stark, utilitarian office. The director closed the door, turning to face Jack with a hard expression. Jack, I've been hearing troubling things, Simmons began, leaning back against his desk. Your association with the Elisarian envoy has not gone unnoticed, and frankly, it's starting to raise questions about your judgment. Jack stood straight, his expression composed. Sir, I assure you that my relationship with Envoy Lyra is strictly professional. Simmons raised an eyebrow, his disbelief evident. Professional doesn't usually include rumors about intimate encounters, Jack. You know as well as I do that such distractions can jeopardize our standing and negotiations. Jack felt a knot of frustration form in his stomach. I understand the concerns, but I can manage my personal and professional responsibilities effectively. That may be, but it's a risk we can't afford, Simmons replied sharply. Here's the bottom line. In whatever is going on with the envoy, or I'll have no choice but to send you back to Earth and pull you from any future missions. The ultimatum hung heavily in the air, its implications clear and dire. Jack's heart sank as the reality of his situation set in. He was being forced to choose between his career and his feelings for Lyra. "Sir, I need some time to consider this," Jack managed to say, his voice steady despite the turmoil inside. "You have 24 hours, Simmons replied, his tone final. "Make the right choice, Jack." Leaving the office, Jack felt as though the walls of the station were closing in on him. He sought out Marco, needing to talk to someone who understood the stakes. Marco was in their shared quarters, and he looked up in concern as Jack entered. "You look like you've seen a ghost, Jack. What's going on?" Jack explained the conversation with Simmons, his frustration and helplessness evident as he spoke. Marco listened intently, his face grim. "This is a tough spot, Jack," Marco said once Jack had finished. "But maybe it's a sign. Maybe it's time to decide what really matters to you." Jack nodded, running a hand through his hair. "I know. It's not just about what I want. It's about what's right for everyone involved." The two friends spent the evening discussing possible outcomes, weighing the consequences of each choice. Jack was torn, his sense of duty battling with his deeper feelings for Lyra. The next day, Jack requested a meeting with Lyra, needing to see her before making his decision. They met in a small conference room, the air between them charged with tension. "Lyra, there's something we need to discuss," Jack started, his voice serious. "I've been given an ultimatum by my superiors. It's either my career or whatever this is between us." Lyra's face paled, her distress clear. "Jack, I never wanted to cause you trouble." "I know," Jack reassured her, taking her hands in his. "But we need to make a decision. I'm being asked to end this, or I lose everything I've worked for." They talked for hours, debating their options, their conversation filled with emotion and painful realism. As the meeting ended, they still hadn't reached a decision, but the understanding of what needed to be done was clearer. Jack left the room with a heavy heart, knowing that whatever decision he made, it would change his life forever. The next 24 hours would be crucial, not just for his career, but for his heart as well. Chapter 7: Sacrifice. The gravity of the ultimatum weighed heavily on Jack as he spent a restless night pondering his future. The following morning, he met with Marco for a brisk walk through the quieter sections of Nexus Prime, hoping fresh air and a friendly ear would help clear his thoughts. "You look like you didn't sleep a wink, Jack," Marco observed, glancing at him with concern. "I didn't," Jack admitted, his voice tinged with fatigue. "I've been thinking about everything, trying to figure out what's the right thing to do." Marco nodded, listening intently as they walked. "It's a tough call, but remember, whatever decision you make, I'm here for you." "I know, and I appreciate that," Jack said, forcing a small smile. "It's just that every option seems to end in loss." As they rounded a corner, they found themselves in a less frequented part of the station, overlooking a vast expanse of stars. The view served as a stark reminder of the isolation and vastness of space, echoing Jack's feelings of solitude in his dilemma. Later that day, Jack requested a private meeting with Lyra. They met in the same small conference room, the site of many previous discussions, now the backdrop for a potentially final decision. "Lyra," Jack started, his voice heavy with emotion, "I've thought about this a lot. About us, about my career, and about the bigger picture." Lyra watched him with a steady gaze, her own conflict evident. "And what have you decided?" Jack took a deep breath, his decision clear in his mind but difficult to voice. "I think it's best if we end this. Not because I want to, but because our responsibilities and the potential consequences are too great. We could cause irreparable damage to our careers and the diplomatic efforts between our people." Lyra's expression was composed, but her eyes betrayed a flicker of sadness. "I understand, Jack. I've been thinking the same. As much as it hurts, this is probably the right decision." The conversation that followed was filled with practicalities, but underscored by a mutual sorrow for what might have been. They spoke about how to transition back to a strictly professional relationship, setting clear boundaries to avoid further complications. Before they parted, Lyra stood and extended her hand, her posture formal, but her touch gentle. "Jack, no matter what happens, I will always be grateful for the moments we shared and for the connection we had." Jack held her hand a moment longer than necessary, memorizing the feel. "So will I, Lyra. You've made a mark on my life that won't easily fade." They parted with a sense of finality, each carrying the weight of their sacrifice. Jack returned to his quarters, feeling a mix of relief and profound loss. He found Marco waiting for him, ready to offer support. "It's done," Jack said simply, sinking into a chair. "We ended it." Marco sat beside him, placing a supportive hand on his shoulder. You did what you had to do, Jack. It's a tough break, but maybe it's for the best in the long run. Jack nodded, staring out at the stars. Maybe. Only time will tell. The days that followed were difficult for Jack. He threw himself into his work, using his responsibilities as a distraction from his heartache. Meanwhile, Lyra continued her duties with her characteristic professionalism, her grace under pressure not going unnoticed by her peers and superiors. As the mission on Nexus Prime drew to a close, Jack prepared for his departure, his thoughts often drifting to Lyra and the brief, intense episode they had shared. It was a chapter in his life that was closing, but the memories, both sweet and painful, would remain with him as he moved forward, carrying the lessons of sacrifice and duty with him into the future. Chapter 8: New Beginnings. The closing days of Jack's mission on Nexus Prime were a bittersweet mix of farewells and last-minute negotiations. Despite the personal turmoil he had experienced, he managed to secure a few crucial agreements that would benefit Earth's diplomatic standing in the galaxy. His professional success, however, did little to ease the personal ache left by his separation from Lyra. On his last day, as Jack packed his belongings in his quarters, Marco came to help. The room was filled with the tangible evidence of months spent far from home, maps, diplomatic cables, and gifts from various alien representatives. "You've done good work here, Jack," Marco said, folding a shirt and placing it in the suitcase. "It's been a tough ride, but you managed to pull through with flying colors." Jack smiled wryly, zipping up a bag. "Thanks, Marco. Couldn't have done it without you. It feels strange, leaving all this behind." Marco placed a comforting hand on Jack's shoulder. "Sometimes, endings are just new beginnings. Who knows what adventures await you back on Earth?" "Maybe," Jack agreed, his mind drifting. "But part of me will always be here, I guess. Part of me will always wonder what could have been." After everything was packed, Jack made his way to the command center to say his final goodbyes. He met with various officials and colleagues, exchanging handshakes and promising to stay in touch. His last stop was the Elisaren delegation's office, where he hoped to see Lyra one final time. Lyra was there, wrapping up her own responsibilities. She looked up and offered a small, sad smile as Jack approached. "Jack, I wasn't sure if you'd come." "I couldn't leave without saying goodbye," Jack replied, feeling the familiar tug in his chest. "You've been an incredible part of my life, Lyra. Thank you for everything." Lyra nodded, her eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "And thank you, Jack, for showing me that there are no boundaries to what the heart can feel. Take care of yourself." They shook hands, a gesture far too formal for all they had shared, yet the only one they could permit themselves in the presence of others. Leaving the delegation's office, Jack walked towards the shuttle bay, the heavy boots echoing his heavy heart. Marco walked beside him, a silent sentinel of support. As the shuttle launched, carrying him away from Nexus Prime, Jack gazed through the viewport at the receding station. He felt a chapter of his life closing, but as Marco had said, perhaps it was also the beginning of something new. Months later, Jack, back on Earth, found a new direction. Inspired by his experiences, he started writing a book about interstellar diplomacy, weaving in themes of love, loss, and the complexities of relationships across species. It was therapeutic, helping him to process his feelings and to share his unique insights. Meanwhile, Lyra, propelled by her experiences with Jack, rose to a prominent position within her own government. She became an advocate for more open relations with other species, using her influence to foster a broader understanding between Elisera and its intergalactic neighbors. Though they were worlds apart, the impact of their relationship lived on in their actions and in the changes they inspired in their respective spheres. Jack often looked up at the stars, wondering about Lyra and hoping that she was looking up at the same sky, feeling the same hopeful yearning for a future where understanding reigned over division. In his book's acknowledgments, Jack wrote about a certain Elisaren envoy who taught him the true meaning of connection, a tribute to the love that had transformed his worldview and redefined his purpose. The book was well received, resonating with those who believe in the power of diplomacy and the human capacity to love beyond all barriers. As Jack embarked on a series of lectures and seminars based on his book, he carried with him the lessons of Nexus Prime, of love, sacrifice, and the endless possibilities of new beginnings. Like and subscribe us for more sci-fi videos and daily, new unique content. Thanks for watching. See you next time.